$10 a week. That's what he decided her life was worth. The woman at the next table whispered, but Olivia Carter heard every word as the envelope slid across the marble surface toward her, crisp, deliberate, final, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow down to that single piece of paper and the man standing across from her, Ethan Cole, billionaire, polished, untouchable. Already turning away before she could even process the quiet ending of everything she had built her life around. His hand resting casually at the back of Vanessa Blake as if Olivia had already been erased, as if the past 5 years had never existed, as if the future growing quietly inside her didn't matter at all, and the room around them kept moving, glasses clinking, soft laughter echoing under golden chandeliers, a normal night for everyone else. But for Olivia it was the exact moment her life split into before and after. She didn't cry, not then, not when the envelope opened and revealed the single $10 bill inside, not when the note beneath it read, temporary support, in Ethan's precise handwriting, not when Vanessa's heels clicked confidently beside him as they walked out together without looking back. Instead, Olivia placed her hand over her stomach, a small unconscious gesture, protective, grounding, something deeper than fear anchoring her in place, because even now, even in this silence, there was something Ethan didn't know, something he hadn't bothered to ask, something no amount of money or power could undo once it came to light. And as she stepped out into the cold night air of the city, the wind cutting through her thin coat, she realized survival wasn't going to be a choice anymore, it was going to be a necessity. The $10 folded carefully into her palm like it meant something, like it could carry her through the week. But it wasn't about the money, it was about what it represented. The dismissal, the arrogance, the assumption that she was nothing without him, that she would disappear quietly into the background while he moved on to a new life, a better life, a life he thought he controlled completely. Olivia walked 3 blocks before she stopped under a flickering street light, her breath visible in the air, her hand still resting against her stomach as if listening, waiting, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the uncertainty, there was a steady, undeniable truth forming, something that would change everything, because weeks later, in a sterile exam room filled with the soft hum of machines, a doctor would pause, stare at the screen, and say words no one expected. Words that would turn that $10 envelope into the most expensive mistake Ethan Cole had ever made. The apartment smelled faintly of instant noodles and cheap detergent, the kind of place you pass without noticing. But Olivia Carter noticed every detail now because survival had sharpened everything: the ticking of the wall clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the exact number of dollars left in her wallet, which after rent and groceries was never more than a few singles folded carefully beside that same $10 bill she had not spent, not once, as if using it would somehow make his judgment permanent. And every week another envelope arrived, identical, precise, cold, like a routine he did not even think about anymore, while across the city Ethan Cole's life continued in polished headlines and quiet celebrations, his name attached to new deals, new appearances, always with Vanessa Blake at his side, smiling for cameras that never turned toward the woman he had left behind. But Olivia did not watch those images for long. She could not afford the distraction, not when her body was changing in ways she could no longer ignore. The mornings were harder now, the fatigue deeper, the quiet awareness that she was not alone settling into something real, something undeniable. And still she told no one, not the landlord, not the neighbors, not even the woman at the small clinic she finally visited after weeks of hesitation. Because speaking it out loud would make it fragile somehow, would make it something that could be taken, and she had already lost too much. The clinic was simple: fluorescent lights and worn chairs, a place where people waited without asking questions, and when her name was called she followed the nurse down a narrow hallway, her heartbeat louder than her footsteps, until she was sitting on a paper-covered table, hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to steady her breathing as the doctor entered with a calm, practiced smile, asking routine questions that Olivia answered quietly, carefully, until the moment the machine was turned on and the room shifted into something else entirely. The soft whir of the ultrasound filling the silence as the screen flickered to life, gray shapes forming, shifting, becoming something more, and the doctor leaned closer, her expression changing in a way that Olivia noticed immediately. A pause, just a second too long, then another adjustment, the probe moving slightly, the image sharpening, and suddenly the air felt heavier, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Olivia's fingers tightened against the edge of the table, her voice barely above a whisper as she asked if everything was all right. And the doctor did not answer right away. Instead she studied the screen again, her eyes narrowing with focus, with recognition, with something that was not concern but not quite surprise either. And when she finally spoke, her tone was different, careful, deliberate, as if choosing each word mattered more than usual. She said there were markers she did not typically see, patterns that suggested something rare, something significant, something that would require further testing, further confirmation. But even before the explanation finished, Olivia felt it. That same steady truth rising again, stronger now, undeniable. And in that small, quiet room with peeling paint and humming lights, the first crack appeared in the story Ethan Cole believed he had already finished. The doctor did not rush her words, and that was what made them heavier, because careful words meant important truths. And Olivia Carter felt that weight settle into her chest as she sat there watching the screen where a life was forming in quiet defiance of everything she had just lost. The doctor explained that certain genetic markers could indicate inheritance patterns, not just health or development but lineage, something deeper, something tied to identity in ways most people never had to consider. And Olivia listened without interrupting, her mind moving faster than the explanation, connecting pieces she had not even known were part of a puzzle. Ethan Cole's world had always been about legacy, about ownership, about control over things that could be measured in dollars and contracts and shares, and now, sitting in a clinic that charged by the visit and not by influence, Olivia began to understand that the life she carried might intersect with that world in a way Ethan had never anticipated. The doctor suggested further testing, more precise analysis, referrals to specialists who handled complex cases, and she mentioned legal implications only briefly, almost as an afterthought, but Olivia caught it, held on to it, because it sounded less like a warning and more like a door opening somewhere far ahead. When she left the clinic, the sunlight felt different, sharper. Like the city itself had shifted slightly without anyone noticing. Cars passed, people moved. Conversations blended into the background, but Olivia walked with a new awareness, one that did not erase the struggle but reshaped it into something else, something with direction. That night she unfolded the $10 bill again, placed it on the small kitchen table, and stared at it not as a limit but as a beginning, a marker of the moment everything had been taken from her, and the moment something else had quietly begun. The following days moved with a strange rhythm, appointments scheduled, calls made, documents requested, and each step revealed another layer of a truth that had been hidden beneath assumptions and silence. A legal consultant, recommended by the clinic without explanation, met her in a modest office and spoke in precise terms about inheritance laws, about recognition, about rights that existed regardless of personal decisions or emotional distance. And when he mentioned the name Ethan Cole, he did not say it with admiration or fear, he said it like a variable in an equation that was about to change. Olivia did not react outwardly, but inside something settled into place, something steady and unshakable. She realized then that Ethan had believed the story ended the moment he walked away, that he had already written the final chapter with a $10 bill and a closed door. But stories built on power often forget the simplest truth, that not everything valuable can be seen in the moment it begins. Weeks passed and the test results arrived in sealed envelopes that felt heavier than anything she had held before, and when they were finally opened under careful eyes and quiet voices, the room fell into a silence that was no longer uncertain but absolute. Because the life growing inside Olivia Carter was not just part of Ethan Cole's world, it was positioned to redefine it entirely. And somewhere across the city, unaware and unprepared, a man continued living as if nothing had changed. The results did not arrive with noise or celebration, they arrived in silence. In a sealed envelope placed carefully on a desk, as if the weight inside could shift the balance of something far beyond that small office. And Olivia Carter sat across from the legal consultant with her hands resting calmly in her lap, her posture steady, her breathing measured, because somewhere between the clinic visits and the long nights in that quiet apartment she had changed. Not outwardly, not in a way the world could immediately see, but in a way that mattered more, in a way that made her unshakable. The man across from her opened the envelope slowly, his eyes scanning each page with the kind of focus that came from years of reading documents that determined the futures of people who never expected to be in those situations, and for a moment there was only the soft sound of paper turning, the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant noise of traffic outside, normal sounds continuing as if nothing significant was happening, until he stopped, his expression tightening just slightly, not with doubt but with confirmation. And when he finally looked up at Olivia, his voice carried a tone that was no longer neutral but precise, deliberate, certain. He explained that the genetic markers confirmed lineage beyond question, that the child she carried was not only legally recognized but positioned within a framework of inheritance that could not be dismissed, not by personal choice, not by distance, not even by time, and Olivia listened without interrupting, her gaze steady, absorbing each word as if placing pieces into a structure she had been building quietly without realizing it. The consultant continued, outlining the implications in terms that were clear and unavoidable: percentages, ownership, controlling interest. Terms that belonged to boardrooms and contracts and billion-dollar decisions, now connected directly to the life growing inside her. And, for the first time since that night at the marble table, the number 10 lost its power completely. It became irrelevant, almost insignificant compared to what now existed beyond it. Olivia reached into her bag and placed that same $10 bill on the desk between them, smoothing it out with careful fingers as if acknowledging it for the last time, not as something she needed but as something that marked where this had all begun. The consultant glanced at it briefly but said nothing, because some symbols did not need explanation, they only needed to be seen. Across the city, Ethan Cole stood in a room filled with polished glass and quiet authority, discussing expansion, strategy, the future, his voice confident, his movements controlled, unaware that the structure he believed he commanded had already begun to shift in ways no meeting could account for. Vanessa Blake stood beside him, her presence effortless, her confidence untouched by the past he had chosen to leave behind, and everything appeared exactly as it should be from the outside: stable, successful, complete. But stability built on assumption is fragile, and assumptions have a way of unraveling at the exact moment they are no longer questioned. Olivia stood up from her chair, gathering the documents that now carried more weight than anything she had ever owned, and as she stepped out into the daylight again, the city no longer felt overwhelming or indifferent, it felt like a stage waiting for something inevitable to unfold, because the truth was no longer hidden in quiet rooms or sealed envelopes. It was moving, growing, approaching a moment when it would no longer ask for recognition, it would demand it, and when that moment arrived, it would not be loud, it would not need to be, it would simply exist, undeniable, and everything Ethan Cole believed he controlled would have to face it. The city did not notice the shift, but Olivia Carter felt it in the quiet rhythm of her days as everything began to move with intention instead of survival, each appointment now part of a plan, each document placed carefully into a folder that grew thicker with every passing week, and the small apartment that once felt temporary started to feel like a place of preparation, not defeat. She woke early, organized her schedule, followed every instruction the legal consultant had given her, because this was no longer about reacting to what had been done to her, it was about controlling what would happen next. The medical visits became more detailed, more precise, specialists confirming what had already been suggested: that the child she carried was not only healthy but uniquely positioned within a legal structure that extended far beyond anything Olivia had imagined when she first held that $10 bill in her hand, and each confirmation strengthened something inside her, something steady, something calm. While across the city Ethan Cole's life continued to accelerate, his name appearing in business headlines tied to a major announcement, a merger that would consolidate control over multiple divisions of his company. A move that required public appearances, legal approvals, and one final step that no one questioned: a formal announcement of his engagement to Vanessa Blake. The event was scheduled at a private venue overlooking the skyline, an exclusive gathering designed to present certainty, success, permanence. Invitations sent to investors, board members, media figures who would shape the narrative before it even began. And in that carefully constructed world everything was aligned, every detail controlled, every outcome expected. but control is often an illusion built on incomplete information, and Olivia understood that now more clearly than ever. The consultant had explained it in simple terms. The moment the child was recognized legally, the structure of ownership would shift. Automatically, not gradually, not symbolically, but in a way that would be documented, enforced, and impossible to reverse, and the timing of that recognition mattered, not for emotion but for impact. Olivia stood by the small window of her apartment one evening, the city lights stretching out in front of her, and for the first time she allowed herself to imagine the moment not as confrontation but as clarity. No raised voices, no dramatic declarations, just truth placed in the exact space. Where it could no longer be ignored, she reached into the folder and pulled out the documents, reading them again not because she needed to but because she could, because each line represented something real, something that belonged to her, and to the life she was carrying, something that could not be reduced to an envelope, or a number or a decision made in a moment of arrogance. The phone on the table buzzed softly. A message from the consultant confirming what they had been preparing for: the date, the time, the location, everything aligned with the public announcement Ethan believed would mark the beginning of his next chapter. Olivia closed the folder slowly, her hand resting again over her stomach, the same gesture she had made on the night everything ended, but now it meant something entirely different, not protection from loss but recognition of what was already secured. And somewhere in the distance the city moved toward that night without hesitation, unaware that the story it was about to witness had already been written in a way no one expected. Not even the man who believed he controlled every outcome. The night of the announcement arrived without warning for anyone except Olivia Carter, the city glowing beneath a clear sky as black cars lined up outside the private venue where everything had been carefully arranged to look effortless. Inside the glass walls the room shimmered with quiet wealth, soft music, low conversations, the kind of environment where decisions worth millions were made between sips of champagne. And at the center of it all stood Ethan Cole, composed, confident, exactly where he believed he was meant to be, his voice steady as he greeted investors and partners, each handshake reinforcing the image he had spent years building. Beside him Vanessa Blake moved with practiced ease, her smile perfectly timed, her presence completing the picture everyone expected to see, and for a while everything followed the script. The speeches began, the announcement framed as a new chapter, expansion, unity, the future secured, cameras capturing every angle that mattered. But certainty has a fragile edge when it is built on incomplete truths, and Olivia understood that better than anyone in the room. She arrived quietly, not through the main entrance, not with attention, but with intention, her steps measured, her posture calm, the folder in her hand held close but not hidden, and as she moved through the space conversations did not stop. No one recognized her at first. No one connected the woman in a simple dress to the narrative unfolding on stage. Until she reached the edge of the gathering where the legal consultant waited, already positioned, already prepared, the timing exact, the moment precise. Because this was not interruption, it was alignment. The consultant stepped forward at the appropriate pause in the program, his voice cutting through the room not with force but with clarity, requesting a brief acknowledgement regarding a legal matter tied directly to the company's structure. And for the first time that evening Ethan's expression shifted. Not dramatically, just a slight narrowing of focus, a recognition that something unexpected had entered a space he believed he controlled. The room quieted, conversations faded, attention redirected, and Olivia stepped forward then, not rushed, not hesitant, simply present, placing the folder into the consultant's hands as if completing a process that had already been decided long before this night began. Documents were opened, reviewed, confirmed in real time, the language precise. The implications immediate, ownership percentages, inheritance rights legal. Recognition tied not to negotiation but to fact, and the silence that followed was not confusion but realization, because the structure Ethan had just presented as stable shifted in a way that no speech could recover, no explanation could soften, and in that moment the number 10 disappeared completely, replaced by something far larger, something undeniable. Olivia did not look at Ethan, she did not need to. The truth was no longer between them, it was in the open, documented, witnessed, and as she stood there with one hand resting lightly over her stomach, the same quiet gesture that had carried her through every stage of this story. The room understood what he had failed to see from the beginning, that what he had dismissed had never been small. It had only been waiting for the moment when it could no longer be ignored. The silence did not break immediately, it stretched across the room like something tangible, something heavy enough to press against every person standing there, and Ethan Cole felt it before he fully understood it, the subtle shift in attention. The way eyes moved not toward him but toward the documents now held at the center of the room, and for a man who had built his entire life on control, that shift was unfamiliar, unsettling in a way he could not immediately correct. He stepped forward, his voice measured, asking for clarification in terms that sounded professional but carried a sharp edge beneath the surface, because clarification meant delay, and delay meant time to regain ground. But the consultant did not hesitate. He spoke with the same calm precision that had guided every step leading to this moment, outlining the legal framework in clear language, not dramatic, not exaggerated, simply factual. The child carried by Olivia Carter had been verified through comprehensive testing, the lineage confirmed beyond dispute, and under existing agreements tied to Ethan's own corporate structure, that lineage translated directly into recognized inheritance and controlling interest conditions. The words were not loud, but they did not need to be. They settled into the room with a certainty that did not invite argument, and around them the reactions began. Subtle at first, a glance exchanged between two board members, a quiet shift in posture from an investor who suddenly understood the implications, the kind of silent recalculation that happens when numbers change without warning. Vanessa Blake's expression held for a moment, perfectly composed, but even she could not mask the flicker of uncertainty that crossed her face as she looked from Ethan to the documents and back again, because this was not part of the script she had rehearsed, not part of the future she had been presented. Ethan reached for the papers then, his movements controlled but faster now, his eyes scanning the lines as if searching for a flaw, a detail that could be challenged. But the structure was clear, built not on assumption but on his own legal foundations, agreements he had signed, protections he had put in place for his legacy, never considering that legacy might arrive in a form he had chosen to ignore, and in that realization something shifted, not outwardly, not in a way that drew immediate attention, but internally. A recognition that the system he trusted was now operating beyond his control. Olivia Carter remained still through it all, her presence quiet but undeniable, not seeking attention, not demanding acknowledgement, simply standing within the truth that had been established, her hand resting lightly over her stomach as it had from the beginning, a gesture that no longer needed explanation, because the room had already understood its meaning. And as the consultant concluded, the final point delivered without emphasis but with absolute clarity. The next legal steps would proceed automatically, documentation filed, recognition enforced. Timelines set in motion that could not be reversed by preference or influence. The event that had been designed to celebrate certainty had become something else entirely, a moment of exposure, not of failure but of oversight, and as the quiet returned, different now, heavier, more aware, Ethan lowered the papers slightly, his gaze lifting not to the audience, not to the investors, but finally to Olivia. And in that brief moment there was no anger, no confrontation, only the undeniable understanding that what he had dismissed as insignificant had been the one thing he could not afford to overlook. No one spoke for several seconds after the final words settled into the room, not because they did not understand but because they understood too clearly, and in that understanding the entire atmosphere shifted from celebration to calculation, from certainty to consequence. Ethan Cole remained where he stood, but the space around him no longer felt like it belonged to him in the same way. The investors who had been leaning in now leaned back slightly, their attention no longer fixed on his vision but on the implications unfolding in real time. Quiet conversations began at the edges of the room. Low voices, controlled tones, the kind of discussions that determined direction without ever becoming visible. Vanessa Blake stepped closer to Ethan, her expression still composed but her eyes searching his face for something, for reassurance, for control, for an answer that did not exist in the script they had followed, and Ethan did not respond immediately. Not because he did not hear her but because his focus had narrowed completely to the realization in front of him, the documents in his And were not just legal confirmations, they were reflections of his own decisions, structures he had built to secure his legacy now operating independently of his intentions. And across the room Olivia Carter stood without moving, without speaking, her presence steady, her role complete. She had not come to argue, not to accuse, not even to confront, she had come to reveal. And that difference was what made the moment irreversible. The consultant continued quietly, outlining the procedural next steps, filings that would be submitted within hours, notifications that would be issued to the appropriate authorities, adjustments that would take effect according to existing legal frameworks. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just process. And in that process lay the full weight of what had changed. Ethan lowered the papers slowly, his grip loosening not out of weakness but out of recognition. The kind that comes when control shifts from personal to structural, and for the first time. That evening he did not look at the audience, he did not address the room. Instead his attention moved once more to Olivia. But this time there was no question behind it, no search for explanation, only acknowledgement, because the truth no longer required confirmation, it simply existed. And in that existence it redefined everything that followed. Olivia met his gaze briefly, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a calm that spoke louder than any words could have. A calm built from weeks of preparation, from nights of uncertainty turned into clarity. From a single moment, when $10 had been placed in her hand as a conclusion, only to become the beginning of something far greater. She turned then, not abruptly, not dramatically, simply stepping away from the center of the room as if her part in the story had reached its natural end. The crowd parted without instruction, without resistance, because something unspoken had already been understood. And as she walked toward the exit, the city lights visible through the glass ahead, the noise behind her did not follow. It stayed contained within that room where conversations would continue, where decisions would be made, where consequences would unfold in ways that no one could fully predict yet. But Olivia did not look back. She did not need to see what would happen next to know that it would happen, because the truth she carried was no longer hidden, no longer waiting. It had been placed exactly where it needed to be, and now it would do what it was always meant to do, unfold on its own, undeniable, irreversible. And far beyond the reach of anyone who had once believed they could control it. The doors closed softly behind Olivia Carter, and the city air met her like something new, not cold, not harsh, just real. And for the first time in weeks she allowed herself to pause, not because she was uncertain but because there was nothing left to prove. The night moved on around her, cars passing, distant lights blinking across the skyline, a world continuing exactly as it always had, yet everything had changed in a way no one could undo. Inside the building conversations had already begun to shift direction. Legal teams forming strategies, investors recalculating positions, decisions branching out from a single undeniable fact that could not be negotiated or dismissed, and at the center of it all stood Ethan Cole. No longer the man presenting a flawless future but the man standing within a reality he had created without fully understanding it. He remained still for a long moment after Olivia left, the papers still in his hand, his gaze no longer focused on the audience or the stage but on something internal, something quieter and far more final. Vanessa Blake spoke again, her voice softer now, searching for stability. But even her words seemed to dissolve into the space between them, because this was not a moment that could be managed with confidence or redirected with charm. It was a moment that required acknowledgement, and acknowledgement meant accepting that control had shifted in a way no one had planned. The consultant continued speaking with others, outlining the next phases, the filings, the automatic adjustments that would begin to take effect within days. And those listening understood that this was not a temporary disruption, it was a structural change, one that would ripple outward through every layer of the company, every agreement, every future decision. And in that understanding something else became clear. The narrative that had been presented earlier that night no longer existed in the same form. It had been replaced by something more complex, more grounded, more real. Outside, Olivia walked slowly along the sidewalk, her hand resting gently over her stomach as it had from the beginning. But now there was no uncertainty in the gesture, only quiet recognition. She did not need to rush, she did not need to look back, because the outcome was no longer tied to a single moment or a single room. It had already been set in motion, and as she reached the corner of the street she paused beneath a streetlight, the same kind of light she had stood under weeks ago, when everything felt uncertain, when $10 had seemed like both an insult and a limitation. She reached into her bag one last time and pulled out that folded bill, holding it for a moment before placing it into a nearby donation box without hesitation, not as an act of rejection but as a final acknowledgement of what it had once represented, and what it no longer could. Somewhere behind her a door opened, voices carried faintly into the night, but she did not turn. She stepped forward instead, continuing down the street with a calm that no longer came from endurance but from certainty, because some endings are not loud, they are quiet, measured, and complete. And some truths do not need to be announced, they simply exist, reshaping everything around them. And as Olivia disappeared into the movement of the city, the story that had begun with dismissal had reached a point where it could only move forward, unfolding in ways that no one could fully predict yet, but in ways that would be felt long after this night had passed. Because some men only understand the value of what they lost when it becomes the one thing they can never reclaim.